Today we're going to be discussing the topic of men's mental health. I am joined here with guest Steve Whittle, who is a men's mental health campaigner and founder of the Tough to Talk charity. So Steve, could you tell us a bit about yourself and why you decided to start Tough to Talk?
Yes, of course. So, thanks for having me here. It's a really important topic. Tough to Talk was started out of my lived experience, really. I'm the classic man behind the mask, very masculine. I was in the armed forces and had a couple of careers in real male-dominated spaces, or male-centric spaces, as you should call them. But behind the mask, no one really ever knew about my complex PTSD. They never knew about my depression. I never told anybody that I'd attempted to take my life 3 times. And off the back of my third failed attempt, where I was just racked with guilt and shame because that's the one thing I have control over, was the first time that I spoke to somebody about what I went through. And they told me that I wasn't alone, that lots of men felt this way. And I didn't believe them. So I went out of my way to prove them wrong, only to discover that actually the silent majority of men who are dying by suicide are going through so much pain, so much crisis, and not talking to anybody about it, even though we know that there are hundreds and hundreds of peer support groups out there like Andy's Man Club and primary care and secondary care. There's lots of opportunity, but we know that only about a third of men are actually seeking support for things they're going through. So there's a huge gap between those men who are well and the men who need support. And so that's why we found it Tough to Talk, to actually go to men rather than waiting for them to go to support.
Perfect, thank you. So do you know what the statistics are for the male suicide rates?
Sadly, yeah, I have so many numbers in my head. I mean, globally, according to the World Health Organization, suicide is the second largest preventable cause of death on the planet. And from country to country and different age groups depends on the statistics, on the differences between the genders. But in England and Wales, we know that men are dying at 3 times the rate of women. And in 2023, for example, there were 6,069 suicides, and 4,506 of those were men. And it's a startling fact, but it's interesting that women are attempting suicide 3 times more often than men, but men are dying more, and that then highlights a real problem. And it comes down to something called the gender mental health gap, which sounds a lot like the gender pay gap, but it's not. It's not a slight on women at all. It actually goes to show that women are much better at talking. And there's lots of journals and studies done on the gender mental health gap, but ultimately what it shows is that most women have greater levels of empathy, greater level of caring, and they are much more open to asking for help. They're much more likely to offer help. So when they go down their journey towards suicide, often they get spoken to before they take action, or they'll ask for help and get the help that they need. Sadly, when they don't get the help they need, they do complete suicide. But there's much more opportunity to intervene, with them on their journey. And also another factor for women is that they often choose methods that are less lethal. So then when we look at men, they are sadly the complete opposite, much more likely to keep it to themselves, not likely to offer help or ask for help. And when they decide that suicide is a viable option for them, they'll choose the most violent methods of doing it. And we've spoken to hundreds of men who we've done interventions with and asked them, why have you chosen such a violent method? And often it comes down to the same thing. I mustn't be a burden, which then opens up the differences between female identity and male identity. And in most cases, men see themselves as having to have purpose, having to have value, mustn't be a burden. And so this is often why they choose really violent methods, is no matter what happens, they mustn't become a burden. The statistics are quite huge, and often it's down to their identity of who I am as a woman, who I am as a man.
That's really interesting to see the difference between the way that men and women both think and act. So thank you. What steps do you think men can take to maintain a good mental health in their daily lives?
Well, again, it's another one of those things that gets asked a lot. And the standard answer is always men need to talk more. But this is where the problem lies. Because of stigma, cognitive dissonance, generational gender bias, it's constantly fed into men that they must be strong, they must be stoic, often silent, just to kind of get on with it. You know, the old man-up culture, and and as a result of that, men are, no matter how much you tell them, are not going to speak up often until it's too late. We know that, like I said before, only about a third of psychological services taken up from the NHS are taken by men. And we know that the majority of men, the silent majority, those who are in most need of support, are not going to peer support networks. And it's often a fear of vulnerability. It's that not meeting societal expectations of being able to find the help that they need. So we can tell most men till we're blue in the face to speak more, and they won't. So for us, the change comes from going into men's spaces and making them a place where they can comfortably speak up through better role modeling, better awareness, and better communication. We often miss opportunities with men because we'll use language and tone of voice that doesn't resonate with them. And it's often delivered by people who they don't recognize solutions in, because it's quite often that men and women see solutions in people who look like them. And the most caring people on the planet, the most empathetic people on the planet are women. Look at HR teams, your marketing teams, your nurses, they're mostly women. And so they're often creating this amazing content to support men. They're often providing the services that often help men. And often that doesn't resonate with them. So we need to get more male role models in these spaces, speaking up about these problems, leading by example through lived experience and peer support. And then that way we can get more men engaging by making it okay to do so.
Yeah. I spoke to Ben Rawson, and he's the founder of this charity called Guidance and Growth. And his community group focuses on men's mental health through activities such as peer-to-peer discussions, but also learning new skills in woodworking and gardening. How beneficial do you believe his work is in bettering people's mental health by bringing men together and performing various activities such as gardening and woodworking?
Okay, so there's lots to unwrap there. So Ben is doing great work by creating a peer support network, if you like. And like many of the other peer support networks, when men go to those and they find their voice, and it doesn't happen overnight, but when they do find their voice, the chances of them having crises that could lead to thoughts of suicide drop dramatically. And we know from the statistics that men often outperform women in getting the help they need once they take that step to go through the door. And what Ben's recognized as well by using gardening and tools and all those kind of things, it puts men side by side whilst doing something productive. And we know that men are much more likely to engage in those environments than like a face-to-face, one-to-one environment. So actually what Ben is doing is fantastic. And what we're trying to do is trying to make it okay for men to get into those spaces.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting to hear from your view. But I think that's all we have time for. So thanks for joining us today. And thanks everyone for listening.